Hi folks, so with this project we are going to combine two assignments together. One of them is called What's in a Name. It was coined by a fellow teacher, and we're going to incorporate some watercolor techniques as well. So here's an example of an interpretation of the project from a student last year, and then there's another example as well. So to start this project, we will set ourselves up with a kit with watercolor paints as well as some supplies. So I've got some oil pastels, I've got my paintbrush, I have a little bit of salt in a container as well as a tack. I have some painter's tape, I've got some thin stuff as well as some thicker, and some paints there. So we're going to use those kind of in the second step. The first step, all I need is a pencil and an eraser. So you'll notice as well that I have a piece of watercolor paper here that's pre-taped to a board, just so things don't shift around on me. And it's also going to give me a clean edge for a border that might come in handy when I get my watercolor paints out. So what I'm going to start with is by actually making sure my pencil is in one hand and my eraser is in the other, because I'm going to close my eyes. And as I close my eyes, I'm going to write my name in block letters or bubble letters and erase. And I'm going to repeat that quite a few times. So I'm going to actually change my lettering as I go. So I'm going to randomly kind of erase, and so I'll repeat that step. I might just make sure as I feel around on the page that I move my letters up. Maybe I'm going to try and make them bigger this time. And obviously as I do this, I'm overlapping what I've just drawn and erased. So I'm going to repeat this step about 5 or 6 times. Okay, so now that I've drawn and erased my name numerous times, what I'm going to do is just kind of create a viewfinder with my fingers and look around the composition and see an area that might kind of stand out to me as being interesting. And my eye's kind of drawn to this area here because there's kind of a little bit of layering happening in overlap. So I think that's going to be my area of focus. And what I'm going to do is take some painter's tape, and I've got a couple different sizes. So yeah, I think I'll use the wider. And I'm just going to block out an area with painter's tape and kind of create a frame within. So now that I have this area blocked out, I'm going to grab my kit for watercolor painting and some water. And kind of decide that, considering my favorite color is orange, I'm going to use some warm tones in this area here. And then in my background, I may incorporate the complementary color of orange. So the first technique that I want to do is a little bit of sgraffito to pick up some of those kind of solid lines that were created and stand out to me. So again, sgraffito is just a scratch technique where I'm putting an indent into the paper so that that'll kind of catch the pigment when I put a wash over top. The next thing I just grabbed was some watercolor pencils. So I'm just going to kind of highlight some areas. And I'm not even going to use water with these just yet. Going to kind of shade in some areas to create a little bit of value. So after I've added a little bit of value just with the watercolor pencil, I'll take my brush and pull some of that pigment. And one thing I want to point out, it may look like I'm going back and forth on the paper with my paintbrush, but I am lifting the brush up after I've made one stroke across so that I don't damage the bristles of the brush. So I'm going across and lifting up. And so the next technique that I think I'm going to incorporate is a little bit of resist with my oil pastel. I'm actually going to take this white into some of this background here and kind of get around some of these shapes and in between. You won't really be able to see that I'm putting white on there, but I'm just applying it very lightly so that when I do put a wash over top, those areas are resisted, and so the oil stays there. And then in some of these areas here, I'm going to use some blue as the complement to my orange. I kind of pick up some of these lines and shapes, but again, very lightly with my pastel itself. And finally, one of the last techniques that I think I will incorporate into this section is I'm going to put a wash down, and then in the areas that are still really wet, I'm just going to put a salt texture. So I'm just sprinkling a little bit, and right away you see the pigment being sucked up into the salt, and we just leave that to dry. So then I think in my background I might do a wet on wet technique, and I might even add a little bit of salt texture down in this area too to kind of unify the texture in the piece. I'm going to wet kind of large blocks of area and then add my color. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty good about my composition as it stands, and so the only thing I might do is just kind of add a few of or kind of pick up some of these lines that are already there and darken them a little bit. I can see the colored or the pencil lines, and so that's kind of what I'm picking up here. And I might kind of alternate between different shades of blue. At this stage here, I would consider mine finished, and so I put this on the dry rack prior to removing any of that painter's tape. So once everything is dry, then you will remove the painter's tape. And then you can take some colored construction paper or black and use a glue stick just around the back edge of your piece to frame it. And the last thing you want to do is just sign your piece.